Okay, so let's talk about the Alex Garland movie, Civil War. So 3 months before recording this, I made a prediction of how people would react to it as soon as the trailer was dropped. And it basically what I was saying, based on Alex Garland's previous movies, based on the studio that was releasing it, A24, that it was going to be much more cerebral than people were anticipating. And that although I thought it would be a good movie, because Alex Garland, everything he makes is from either pretty good to excellent, I thought this was going to be a good movie. So before I get into like a review or talk about the movie itself, let me address that. Was my prediction correct? Yes and no. So overall, the movie's doing pretty well. Critics like it. Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 82% score. To get a feel of what people think of it, just the viewers, I went to IMDb. It has an IMDb score of 7.6. So I'm going to put the distribution of the scores on the screen there. And if you look, that's actually the distribution for American audiences. Now, I'm not going to put any of the other audiences. IMDb, they separate it. You can see how they separate United Kingdom, Canada, Netherlands. But it's a little bit more divisive in the United States as far as the views go than in other countries. But overall, it seems to be that the average for all viewers, it seems to be ranging from about 7.4 to just under 8, which is pretty good. Now, I do think there's a large number of people who did walk in expecting one thing. I think a lot of people walked in expecting one thing and were pleasantly surprised. And other people walked in expecting something different. So I'm going to just read one of the reviews left by someone on IMDb who doesn't have a favorable opinion about it. And for context, saying that 5 out of 10 or less score are people who didn't like the movie, about 17% of American raters gave it a 5 or below. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this. It says, "Do not waste your money on this film. It plays like a bad straight-to-DVD production." And that's maybe, it does have a $50 million budget, so maybe they're kind of seeing the limitations of the budget. That being said, I thought they did a lot with the budget, but I'll continue. 90 minutes, there's literally one scene that has any resemblance to a Civil War situation. Okay, and I'll address that in my review of the movie. Prior to that, it's all poor dialogue, boring scenes with nothing going on, and no backstory whatsoever. This is the result when the budget is low and everyone involved in the production is trying not to generate an ounce of controversy discussion. Okay, so let me write a little more. So one of the things that sticks out to people, and I'll put the map up, I guess, there, of how the country seems to be divided. And the division there, clearly Alex Garland was not trying to make a statement about current politics in the sense of left-right, because 2 of the states that basically combine forces from the failed state of the United States are Texas and California. So if people aren't aware of this, Americans, you probably are. If you don't live in the United States, which a lot of my viewers don't, basically Texas is viewed as a fairly stronghold for conservative politicians, and California is the opposite. So let me kind of get into the review of the movie, and I'm going to try to address what the person was saying here. So basically, this movie takes place. We don't know if it's an alternate, some type of alternate reality or the near future. If it is an alternate reality, it's one that pretty much mirrors our own reality, because there are mentions of Ceausescu, Gaddafi, and Saddam. I don't want to elaborate that on too much because I don't want to do spoilers. And mentioning those 3 people, if you know the history of those, that's kind of a spoiler. So what happens in this movie is that the country's been splintered. I don't want to give anything that isn't given away in the trailer, but basically the president has seized power. Various states have splintered away from the federal government. Some have stayed loyal, and some have formed their own kind of confederations, in a matter of speaking. And one of the largest of these confederations, possibly the most powerful one, which was formed by an allegiance between Texas and California, is doing an offensive against the president in Washington, D.C. Now, this is essentially a road trip movie because you don't see much of the president. You don't really get much backstory, as that person said. But what you're doing is you're following these reporters. And that's what the movie is. It's kind of a road trip movie. It starts out in New York City, and then they're taking a trip to Charlottesville, Virginia. And then eventually they're going to be heading to D.C., following with one of the possibly the last offensive of this allegiance between California and Texas. Now, I think going into this movie, you have to say, hey, watch the movie that's being presented in front of you and don't expect the movie that you have in your head. Because Alex Garland isn't taking a stance on current politics. And that's really, I think, the strength of the movie. He's really making a commentary on the nature of conflict and civil war itself. So this is almost kind of like Howard Zinn's Civil War, in the sense that you're getting the viewpoint of the people. Because in a civil war, what leader is making this decision, what faction is doing this, what person of power is doing, really has very little effect on the people, the everyday people, day to day, trying to get by. So as you follow these journalists, they're encountering different areas of the country between New York City and Washington, D.C., and they kind of go through Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia, and eventually into D.C., and you're kind of seeing how people have reacted to this and how the conflict's playing out. And it's definitely disturbing, but it's actually probably realistic. So the comment that it doesn't reflect the Civil War, yes, I'd say it does reflect the Civil War. There is this impression that Americans have that a civil conflict, a modern civil conflict, would be people lined up in a field like Gettysburg marching towards one another. And I don't think any conflict was ever like that for most of the people who were living in the countries, because whenever you have civil war, you have people's lives being disrupted, you have war crimes taking place, and you have people who are taking advantage of the chaos. And you see it in this movie. So if anything, the movie is very much an anti-war movie. Now, the one thing that I do see optimistic hidden in the movie is that clearly, or it's stated, and you can say that even, not saying that it's necessarily confirmed, but I think we can be sure that it is fact that the president has, fact is the president has appointed himself for a third term. And if you're familiar with the Constitution, we only allow for 2 term limits. So unless that was amended, he's already breaking the Constitution, and he's used the military to strike American citizens. So the reason I consider one thing optimistic is that even though you have California and Texas, which, like I said, even if this is an alternate reality, I think it's supposed to be more in the case of maybe near future, that these states, despite having very different political leanings, would say they won't stand for an executive seizing and taking absolute power. Now, my own opinion is that I think a lot of people, as long as it was their person in power, they would be okay with the executive seizing power and doing away with the Constitution. Now, this is where I'm going to get a little preachy, but only for a moment. I think the greatness of our country is that there is no loyalty to a political party or a individual in power when it comes to the government itself, and that the government is actually ran by a bureaucracy that, despite it being left-leaning or right-leaning, they support the Constitution. And that is the difference between the United States government versus some other countries, for example, and not to be too critical of the people, but just the party itself, China. If you're a member of the United States military, which I was, you swear your allegiance to the Constitution, take that as you will. And if you are a member of the Chinese military, you swear your allegiance to the party. So I think this is actually addressed somewhat in the movie, because at one point it's mentioned that the president disbanded the FBI. And the reason I think they made this statement is because if there is a safeguard to an executive seizing power, it's going to be the civil service. It's going to be those individuals who work for the government who aren't elected. It's going to be the federal law enforcement. It's going to be the military, the Secret Service. So I think if you were an executive and you wanted to seize power, what you would do is you would discredit these civil services. And quite honestly, you can see how certain presidents in the past have purposely attacked the civil service. And I think there's a reasoning behind that. A lot of our law and order type people who say we black the blue, as soon as the FBI, which is the federal, a branch of the federal law enforcement, as soon as the FBI was investigating the executive they supported, they all of a sudden were no longer backing law enforcement, but they became critical of that law enforcement. Not saying that the FBI is perfect. We all know that the FBI has a very troubling past. Martin Luther King wiretapping. So, and if I haven't said this already, I really liked the movie. I thought it was a pretty good depiction of many elements. The urban warfare the urban warfare scenes were very, very visceral. We really weren't told or said to support one side or the other. We know that the president in this world is attacking American citizens, but even the people who are opposing the president in this movie, in this world, they're actually doing some pretty atrocious things themselves. Yet at the same time, there are moments in the movie where there does seem to be showing where human beings can work together and try to help. There are moments in this movie where it goes from a lot of action to very tense to kind of, it gives you time to breathe and to kind of take things in. Now, the journalists in this movie are kind of proxies for us, I believe. And this is kind of an ode to journalism. One of the comments I heard someone make is that and once again, I don't want to give anything away, but at some point the journalists kind of they come off as so detached in their behavior, and especially at something that happens towards the end of the movie, that they come off as almost psychotic. Now, I think Alex Garland he clearly is supportive of the press and journalism, and I don't think he's trying to say anything critical about them. What I think he's trying to say is that, as we know, that eventually we become desensitized to these things, and that clearly the journalists are representing, they're kind of us. They're the proxy for us experiencing all this. And we know that we can see these things, and eventually, not saying that it no longer becomes, it stops becoming upsetting, but we can become somewhat numb to it. Right now, there are literally dozens of conflicts going on throughout the world, whether they are non-state actors versus governments, or whether they are, in the case where you have, like in Mexico and Ecuador, basically large crime syndicates fighting the government. We live in probably one of the most contentious times in history, well, in recent history, and not taking into account the Cold War, but actual conflicts. And we kind of become numb to it. Ukraine, Gaza, we don't even talk about what's happening in the Sudan, Haiti. So we see this on the news and we get upset and we tweet out but we deal with it. We go about our day. So I think that's what Alex Garland is showing in that. Overall, I think and I've already said this 3 times already. I think it's a powerful movie. I think it's saying a lot of things. I made it a point not to listen to other people's reviews with this. And what's going to happen is I'll probably listen to some other people's reviews and be like, man, I wish I had thought of that. So I wanted this to be all my own thoughts and ideas. I'm still kind of thinking about it. I saw the movie. Let's see here. I saw the movie. I saw the movie 4 days ago, and it's still kind of sitting with me. It will probably be one of the movies that sits with me the most that I see this year. And I also think that it probably maybe kind of has an additional visceral I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say there. I guess it probably maybe affects me a little bit more having been in the military and basically witnessing a civil conflict personally overseas, and kind of seeing just some of the after effects of that and the continuation of it. One thing that also crossed my mind, and I don't want this to go on too long, is that I know that when Saving Private Ryan came out, a lot of people who were World War II vets were kind of, I guess, triggered by by some of the action scenes, specifically the opening scene of the Normandy invasion, D-Day invasion. And I do wonder if when people watch this, if you served overseas in an urban environment, maybe some of the scenes will kind of have a similar effect. So I'll give that warning. If you are a veteran and you served in Baghdad or Afghanistan, or maybe just served in any conflict, and you do have maybe some issues with anxiety or stress or symptoms of PTSD, kind of be warned into going into this movie, because at the very beginning of the movie there's an incident that takes place, and I'm watching it, and I'm being vague here, but I remember seeing someone about to do something. I'm like, I know what they're going to do. I know what they're going to do, and actually being in a situation where I'm being in the middle of Baghdad, essentially looking for that exact same thing, and it kind of put me there for a moment. But anyway, I thought it was an excellent movie, and it's something to think on. And I'd like to hear other people's opinions in the comment section. Anyway, thank you.